Today we come to the study of a very little book called Ruth. In the Hebrew Bible, Ruth is in the same scroll as the book of Judges. The Jews believe that Samuel wrote these two books and they combined them into one book for a very good reason. In our Bible, it's a separate book, but it's actually back to back with one another. Now, if you think of these two books as one book, it's kind of hard to picture it. They're such contrasting books. One is a book about Judges, a book, a lot of people over 200 years. Ruth is about one family over one generation. Judges is a national book, history of Israel. This is a history of one little family. Judges is full of violence and horrible things. Ruth is so beautiful, a love story with a great ending. Judges is a terrible ending. Then we see the style of Judges is like 7 cycles of sin and oppression. Then they said sorry to God. God sent a deliverer. Then they had peace. And then they start again. 7 cycles like that. Ruth is one straight line. What happened? Next, next, next. And they live happily ever after. Very contrasting books. And yet, they are perfectly fit together as one book, as we will find out at the end of this lesson. Now, another thing you'll notice about the book of Ruth is that God is hardly ever mentioned. It says that your God will be my God. God is like mentioned in passing. He's not like as if he's an active part of this story. He's actually in the background. And this is so brilliant because every day in our life, God is involved, but he is not in the front. In fact, most of us do not even realize he is planning, he is helping, he is involved, he's feeling happy, he's feeling sad about what we do. He's there, but he's behind the scenes. So it's like providential. It's not like, when you see God do a miracle, that God is present. The rest of the time he's absent. No. He's present all the time, but he doesn't get in the way. He allows us to have our life, make our decisions, and yet like a father watching from the back, concerned and trying his best to help us walk in the right direction. All right, so the presence of God in this book is like the presence of God in our life today. So now let's just look into these 4 little chapters. It begins with this line. Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled. That's the first verse, all right? So the context of this book of Ruth is exactly in the time of the judges. In other words, the darkest period of Israel's, almost the darkest period of their history. This horrible time. Then it says there was a famine in the land, verse 1. Of course, when people are not obeying God, God punishes them. And God's way of punishing in those days was to hold back the rain. And there was no rain, there's famine. So there was famine in the land. And it says, a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah. Right? Bethlehem in the place of Judah. So we see here a contrast. The word Bethlehem simply means house of bread. You see the word Beth, right? Bethany, Bethaven. Beth is house. Bethlehem is house of bread. In the house of bread, there was no bread. There was a famine. Why? Because they had disobeyed God. And this tells us that this man then decides to go to the land of Moab to look for food. Now, Moab is the enemy of the Israelites, ancient enemy. So he runs off to Moab to look for food. That's not what he should have done, because in the land time of famine, it was God telling them, I am angry with you. So what do you do when God is telling you he's angry with you? Run away? No. Say, sorry, God. I am sorry. Please forgive me and get back right with God. And God will provide. God should have provided for this man, but he ran away. Okay, so we see here that just in this little story, a little one-line beginning, it is speaking of a man who ran away, and you know what? It was his punishment. He died. This man, Elimelech, died. And his two sons then married two Moabite girls, Oprah and Ruth. And what happened to them? They died. Why? Because they were not supposed to marry people who had different gods. Okay, so they married when they should not have married them. And so they died. But the two girls whom they married, they're innocent. They didn't know God's law. Right? So they will survive. So now we have the widow, mom, Naomi, and her two daughters-in-law. And Naomi tells them, I'm going to go back to Israel. She realized probably something was wrong. And so she said, I'm going to go back. And she told her two daughters-in-law, don't go back with me. Life is going to be really hard for a Gentile in Israel. Please just stay here. So the first one, Oprah, said, okay, I'm staying here. The second said, no, I'm going with you. Your God will be my God. Wow. Now the question is, why did Ruth have such a faith in a God she had not really known? How can you have faith? Comes by hearing, hearing by the word of God. How did she have faith? Obviously, it was through Naomi's life, Naomi's testimony, Naomi's sharing about her God, that she began to say, your God is my God. The God you believe in is the God I believe in. All right? So we see here a faith, simple faith of Ruth, the Moabitess, in the God of Israel. So they move back to, they're going to go back to Israel, and Naomi changes her name. Naomi, she said, don't call me Naomi anymore, call me Mara. Naomi means pleasant, nice. Mara means bitter, sad. Mara is the root name of the name Mary. All right, so some of you have got names like Mary, Marie. In Israelite, actually, it's Miriam. All right, Miriam is the name Mary. It means, the root word is bitterness. Maybe some of you Marys don't know your name means bitter. All right. So anyway, she goes back, and then they need to look for food in this Israel. And in Israel, there is a kind of law given in the Torah that when you glean your harvest, that means you harvest, you cannot glean it. That means whatever you harvest, what drops on the floor, you leave it for the poor, the widows, the foreigners. And so Ruth goes out to look for food during harvest time. It happened during harvest time, and it happened, it was the beginning of harvest, and it happened that she went to a field, and it happened that that field was the field of a relative of Elimelech, her father-in-law. She didn't know that. You see, this is how God working behind the scenes. As she desires to do right, God directs her. So as we make right decisions, God directs us. Okay? So she goes there, and Boaz sort of takes an interest in her and says, who's that girl? And they said, oh, that's Naomi. Remember Naomi, your relatives' wives. This is the daughter-in-law. And they said, she's so loyal. She's a Moabitess. And she followed her mother-in-law to Israel. And so Boaz had a little eye on her. And Boaz tells her, you just harvest, you just glean during my harvest season. Harvest goes on for several weeks. And then you just take whatever you want, and my guys will take care of you. So he showed a little interest to her. So during the whole harvest period, he's there supervising. She's there picking up the harvest that drops on the ground. They're not supposed to, the harvesters are not supposed to pick it up, allow them to pick it up. So she brings home the food every day for Naomi. Now, at the end of harvest, Naomi senses that Ruth likes Boaz a lot. You know, women have a sixth sense. They can sense these things. Guys are very blurred with these things. So she said to Naomi, change your clothes. You see, at that time when you were a widow, your husband had died, you wore widow's clothes, right, to show your mourning. Change your widow's clothes. Change to clothes that show that you are willing to get married, right? So a lot of it is symbolic by the way they dress. So she said, at the end of harvest, they're going to have a celebration, and Boaz is going to have a nice feast, and he's going to sleep there near the harvest, near the place where they harvest all the stuff and keep all the barley harvest and all the harvest. He's going to rest there that night after the celebration. What I want you to do is go and lie down quietly by his feet. You know what's going on? Now, the custom in those days is a girl cannot propose to a guy. There was no way that ever took place, not acceptable. But a girl could hint, could suggest that she wants you to propose to her. And the way they do it is to warm the feet of the man. So she went and lay near the feet of Boaz. That was her way. And he woke up with a shock. Who's this person lying at my feet? And then he realizes what it is. And he says to her, yes, I would like to take you for my wife, but there is a relative who is closer to your husband's family than me. Now, again, this is a custom in Israel. In Israel, all land was given to families, okay? Now, families got poor along the way. They sold their land. They sold their land. But after 50 years at the Jubilee, all land reverts back to the original family, okay? So, in other words, if Elimelech's family died and Ruth's husband died, then if there are no kids, that land now doesn't go back to the family of her husband. So the rule in Israel was, if a widow had no kids, the next of kin should marry her so that a kid would be born, a male kid would be born, and that male kid would carry the name not of the guy who married her, but of the original husband, so that the name will continue, right? And so that at the 50th year, it will go back again to the original family. So this is what Boaz said, you know, I want to marry you, but I don't have the first rights. There's another relative closer. So what they did was, the next day, they went to the city, and all the elders gathered, and the other relative who was closer was also there. And Boaz said to him that Ruth has come back, and you are next of kin. You are the closest relative. Please marry her to bring seed, to bring a name, so that the land could go back to the name of the late husband. Then the man said, yeah, okay, I like the land, I want it. But I don't want to marry this girl. I can't. For various reasons. Maybe his wife didn't like it or whatever, I don't know. And so he said, I won't take the land. I won't buy the land. I won't marry this girl. And so the rights then pass on to the next in line, which is Boaz. So Boaz marries her. Now it's a funny custom there that when this first kin, the next in line, didn't want it, he took off his shoe and gave it to Boaz. You say, what the world is this? All right. The shoe, when you take off a shoe and give it to someone, it's a way of shaking hands in those days, like deal done. All right. Thank you for offering to me, but I don't want it. Thank you very much. You can have the deal. All right. So that's the little customs that along the way. Now you say, what's all this story about? So finally Boaz marries Naomi, and they have babies, and they have children, and they live happily ever after. You think, what kind of story is this? What's this got to do with the Bible? Maybe it shows God's providence in the back end to help a poor lady get a home and get food, and a poor mother-in-law to get... That's much more than that, because the last part of Ruth tells us a baby was born. His name was Obed. And Obed had a son called Jesse. And Jesse had a son called David. I hope you're getting it now, all right? So what happens is that Ruth became the grandmother, okay, of Ruth the Moabite, the Gentile, became the grandmother of King David, the royal line through whom the Messiah would come. Now I hope you're seeing the picture, huh? Because Judges ends by saying, and there was no king in Israel at that time, the last line of Judges, and every man did that which was right in his own eyes. In other words, oh my goodness, no wonder there's chaos, because there is no leadership. There is no king. And then the book of Ruth comes and says, aha, David has come. You know, all the Jews, when they read the book of Ruth, it's like, whoa, Ruth is the one that helped produce David, the king of Israel. We Christians say, wow, it's Ruth that helped produce David, the ancestor of Jesus Christ, our Messiah. So that's how it links up. Judges say such a horrible ending because no one to lead, no one to help Israel in their misery. Then Ruth comes, and the story ends with this royal beginning of a royal line. I hope you see how the Bible always links up. So Judges shows a terrible ending. Ruth shows a very promising ending, the word David. Now, interesting, the ancestors of David, okay, were Boaz and Ruth. They produced a son called Obed, then Jesse, then David. Now, Gentile blood came in, right? Ruth is a Moabitess. Then if you look at Matthew chapter 1, the time you check Matthew chapter 1 verse 5, you see the name of Boaz. And, of course, it's spelled a little different. In the Greek way of spelling Boaz is B-O-O-Z, not B-O-A-Z. Boaz, right? That's the Greek version of the spelling of his name. And we find that Boaz himself had Gentile blood. He was a descendant of Rahab. Of course, it's spelled a little different in Matthew. It's spelled Rechab. That's again the Greek spelling. Rahab was the first Gentile believer in Canaan. Remember the story of Jericho? The prostitute Rahab is an ancestor of Boaz. And Ruth is a Moabitess. So he's part Gentile, and Ruth is Gentile, and they produce Obed, and then Obed produced Jesse, and Jesse produced David. I hope you're getting it. Gentile blood was coming into this pure, into the royal line of Israel. What is this a hint of? One day the Gentiles will come in, all right, into this family that God is planning. So I hope you see here a little bit of the hint, the beautiful connections in the Bible that nice, beautiful weaving, the tapestry. Now, this is a romance story, okay? You say, wow, the one before, the book of Judges, is war and violence and horrible things. This one is romance, so beautiful. What is it telling us? What is the whole Bible about? The horrible sinfulness of our nature, terrible nature, causing violence, sex, and immorality, and all that injustice. But actually, the redemption story is a romance story about Jesus looking for a bride. Okay, so we see here, Boaz. He's called the Redeemer. In Israel, a man who takes in this widow is called a kinsman redeemer. He redeems this poor, helpless widow and gives her a son to carry the name. Jesus is our Redeemer. He helped us, helpless people, sinful, helpless people with no future, no inheritance. And what happened is Jesus took us in as his bride. I hope you see a little bit of the hint, not very clear, but it's a hint of this. The Gentile bride, you and me, taken in by our Redeemer, the King of Israel. Okay? So I hope this story helps us to see a little bit of how God is going to solve the mess in Judges. Judges is a book like, how do you redeem these people? Who do you redeem them from? There's such a mess. This whole culture is such a mess. Right? And then you see this nice, encouraging story. Some questions are going to be brought up, like, you say that you cannot marry a Gentile. How come Boaz married a Gentile? I was asked that question once. Well, Boaz was just doing his duty to help. This is his duty as a kinsman redeemer to take this widow in. So he wasn't like doing something wrong. He was doing something to obey the rule of God, to be a kinsman redeemer. As opposed to Mahlon and Chilion, the two guys who originally married Orpah and Ruth. They were not doing a duty. They just found a pretty girl in Moab and they just married her against God's rules. So they got punished. But Boaz was blessed because he was obeying God to be a kinsman redeemer. And Boaz becomes also an ancestor of the royal line. David and then Jesus. So I hope this story helps us to see again the beautiful book and how it's all slowly coming closer and closer to this glorious marriage in the book of Revelation. The romance of Christ and us. The relationship we have is a love relationship. Boaz loved Ruth. Ruth was loyal to, she was a loyal girl. She was loyal to her mother-in-law, right? And now she'll be loyal to her husband. Okay, so I hope this is a beautiful story to end a very awful story in the book of Judges. God bless.